second Sunday of Lent.
A reading from the book of Genesis. God put Abraham to the test. He called to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son Isaac, your only one whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There you shall offer him up as a holocaust, on a height that I will point out to you." When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Then he reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the Lord's messenger called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he answered. "Do not lay your hand on the boy," said the messenger. "Do not do the least thing to him. I know now how devoted you are to God, since you did not withhold from me your own beloved son." As Abraham looked about, he spied a ram caught by its horns in the thicket. So he went and took the ram and offered it up as a holocaust in place of his son. Again the Lord's messenger called to Abraham from heaven and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you acted as you did, in not withholding from me your beloved son, I will bless you abundantly and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants shall take possession of the gates of their enemies, and in your descendants all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. All this because you obeyed my command." The word of the Lord.
I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I believed even when I said, I am greatly afflicted. Precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. O Lord, I am your servant, the son of your handmaid. You have loosed my bonds. To you will I offer sacrifice of thanksgiving, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. My vows to the Lord I will pay in the presence of all his people, in the courts of the house of the Lord, in your midst, O Jerusalem. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but handed him over for us all, how will he not also give us everything else along with him? Who will bring a charge against God's chosen ones? It is God who acquits us. Who will condemn? Christ Jesus it is who died, or rather was raised, who also is at the right hand of God, who indeed intercedes for us. The word of the Lord.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The Gospel of the Lord.
The first reading comes from Genesis 22, 1-2, 9a, 10-13, and 15-18. Abraham is called to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, the one he loves. Now, why is Isaac his only son? Because God has already had Abraham send Ishmael, his other son, off into the desert, the one he loves. And how do we know that Abraham loves Isaac? Because on their way up the mountain, Mount Moriah, where Isaac is to be sacrificed, Abraham carries the knife and the fire, while Isaac carries the wood. That's not because Abraham is lazy or old. A knife and a fire would be the very things that a child might harm himself with. So Abraham carries that because he wants to protect Isaac to the last minute. Even though Isaac is the child of the promise, the fulfillment of everything that God had promised, Abraham takes the risks. He's willing to sacrifice his son, and because of that, the child is reprieved and Abraham is blessed, told that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Now, how much of that promise does Abraham actually receive? Very little. He receives little of the land. He receives very few children. Nevertheless, Abraham believes, he trusts, because he realizes that God's promise is eternal, and even if it's not fulfilled at this moment, it would be in the long run. Now, this passage Christians call the sacrifice of Isaac. Jewish people call it the binding of Isaac. And it might have been originally about the end of child sacrifice, but certainly the way it appears in Genesis, it's about the question of test of faith. Why did God test Abraham? Maybe because God wanted Abraham to learn how deep his faith was. Because God knew how deep Abraham's faith was. Abraham didn't. And it's only in this test, only in these moments where believing seems impossible, that we truly learn the cost of faith. The second reading is from Romans 8, 31b-34. God gave his only Son on our behalf, even though we didn't deserve it, even though we were sinners and rebels. If that is true, then why should we be afraid of anything else? God will certainly protect us. If God is for us, what can harm us? Now, realize that doesn't mean we're going to be scot-free. Our lives are going to be filled with blessing. We're going to win the lottery every week. God will be with us, whether we have won the lottery or whether we're dying on our cross. The Gospel is from Mark 9, 2-10. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain. Now, whenever anything important is happening in the Gospel, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, the big three, and they go up a high mountain. Now, traditionally, we call this Mount Tabor, a mountain that's found in Galilee. It doesn't name the mountain, but the tradition that it's Mount Tabor is very, very old. He's transfigured. The very glory of God is seen through him. And we see Elijah and Moses with him. Elijah, the prophet, Moses, the giver of the law. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. What does Peter say? Let me build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. He doesn't quite know what he's saying, but he realizes this is a very sacred event. Remember how tents were where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, the very place that God manifested his presence. Therefore, he's offering to build these tents because this is something holy. A cloud overshadows them, much like the cloud that overshadowed the temple that represented the glory of God. And a voice comes from the heavens, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." My beloved Son, that Jesus is seen as the Son of God. Remember, this is not the Son of God as Jewish people understood in the Old Testament, a hero, because many prophets and kings were called sons of God. This is Son of God as we understand it, the only begotten Son of God. And then everything returns to normal. As they go down the mountain, what does Jesus say? Don't say anything till the Son of Man has risen from the dead. But they don't quite understand what risen from the dead means. Why did Jesus give them this manifestation of his glory? Maybe because the cross is coming, and he realizes that they'll never be able to understand the message of the cross unless they recognize that he is the Son of God, that he does have the very glory of God in his person. And he didn't have to go through the cross. He could have escaped from that, but he freely chose it. It manifests to us how profound the love of God is, that God would allow his only Son to die out of love for us, to love us literally to death. This is the message of that transfiguration. Now there's another way we can apply the transfiguration to our spiritual life. Very often as we're praying, as we're walking in the countryside, as we're on top of a mountain, we have a few minutes where everything becomes clear. These are called numinous moments. They don't last long. They're very often interrupted after a short time. But those little insights into that which is beyond are gifts from God, much as the transfiguration was, so that we have the strength to be able to slug it out when we're walking in the valley, because life is often very difficult and very confusing. We need those little insights to give us the strength to keep going when the going gets tough. And may God bless us.